Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a little different. Today's episode is a recording of me getting interviewed on another podcast. I was interviewed recently by the Seller's Journey podcast with Joseph Fung, and it was really a lot of fun. We talked through a couple of questions that haven't been asked in a really, really long time, which all centered around how did I get into sales? I haven't really talked about it much. I mean, a lot of people who listen to our show and have known me or worked with me or follow a LinkedIn post know that I spent many years working in Silicon Valley, working with startups. I've worked with a couple of publicly traded companies, but I've never actually talked about how I got into sales in the first place. So this episode was really unique in that Joseph was curious, and that was what he wanted to know, is how did I get into sales? Why sales as a career, and how have I been able to continue to make sales a career and now a company? So had a lot of fun with this. I talked to Joseph after his interview of me and asked if it would be okay to share this episode with our tribe, with our listeners, and he said, yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a little preview. When I first started selling, I was selling doors, door to door. So you'll have to listen to the rest of the episode to find out what that means. And that's it. So check out the episode. It's about 20, 25 minutes long. So it's a shorter podcast than we normally do. I think you'll really enjoy it. Let me know what you think. Leave us a comment, leave us a review. I've been doing more and more interviews on other podcasts. And so as I do those interviews, we oftentimes get permission to post them here. And I'll be doing that as we go along. I've been having a lot of fun doing it to share another side of our story, my story, and how we help people out there to get our message out to help as many people as we can with sales and growing their company. So in the meantime, if you are a first-time listener or you have not yet done this very, very important thing, then I highly encourage you to download a copy of my latest book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, over at salesqualia, QUALIA.com. If you go to salesqualia.com, right there on the homepage, there's a button that says click to download or start reading now or something like that. So I've made the complete copy of the book, PDF version of the book, available for download. It's not free plus shipping or any of that jazz. It's totally free. So just click the button, pop your email address in there so we know where to send it. And that's that. So I'd love for you to grab a copy, share it with a friend or 10, or have them download a copy of their own. And I think that's all you need to know. Let's head over to my conversation getting interviewed with Joseph Fung over on his podcast called The Seller's Journey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joseph Fung, and today we are speaking with the great Scott Sambucci. Scott, how are you doing?
Dude, I love that you called me the great Scott Sambucci. You can hang out with me anytime.
Oh, your podcast, your experience, it's necessary. And I only wish that we had better intro music for you, something a little bit more epic.
Dude, I loved it. I was jamming while you were doing it.
Nice. Thanks again for joining us. I appreciate the time.
Glad to be here.
Cool. So some of our audience members may not know you. So why don't we help them out? Let's start at the beginning. Where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to college? Where'd you grow up?
Grew up in New Jersey. Was able to get out of New Jersey, fortunately, when I was 14. My parents, we had a really bad snowstorm one year. My parents were like, that's it. We're moving to Florida. So we moved to Florida. From there, I ended up at Winthrop University down in South Carolina. Most people have probably not heard of it. It's just a small state school in South Carolina. Went there because I had an academic scholarship. And so I was paying for college myself and thought free was a pretty good price. And, spent 4 years there, graduated college when I was just before I turned 22. And from there, ended up doing sales.
So what's so great about your journey? I mean, you've accomplished so much. You work with great companies. The part that jumps out to me, that's really unique, I think, about your story was that you started in sales, left sales, and came back. So why don't we start with that first step, that first chapter? How did you get into your first sales role?
Yeah, great question. So I think it really started out of needing to pay rent. I was graduating college. I was a history major, which means you either teach, work at a museum, or sell. And a good friend of mine who was a couple years older than me had also just recently graduated, and he got into sales. He wanted to be in sales. He got into it. He was doing pretty well. And he said, look, man, you should get into sales. You'd be good at sales. I'd always waited tables. I'd worked in restaurants. I'd always been kind of a good social, kind of extroverted person and good with people. So it seemed like a pretty good fit. And so that's really what led me into sales in the first place. And my first real job out of college was selling cabinet doors. I don't even have this on my LinkedIn profile. Yeah. So I found a job working for a cabinet door manufacturer in North Carolina, and I got paid. My base salary was $22,000 a year, and they gave me a Ford Ranger full of cabinet doors. And my job was to drive around to cabinet makers in Western North Carolina and explain to them why they should let us do the doors and they could just focus on the rest of the cabinets.
Wait, you were doing door-to-door door sales?
Basically, I was doing outdoor sales. Yeah, I was driving around the hills of Western North Carolina, talking to, a lot of these are like one-man shops, small cabinet makers that would make either custom projects for homes that were getting built, and some larger companies that might partner with home developers and those kinds of things. But basically, that was my first job, and I did that for about 2 months and didn't sell a single door.
What incredibly successful sales career start right there. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it was just like, I just didn't love the industry. It was a job. I was like, okay, $22K. I mean, I was just back in 1996. Wasn't a great salary back then, but at least it was a salary. And then getting a Ford Ranger, I'm like, okay, now I don't have to pay for a car. So that adds to it. And the company was okay. I mean, the manager was okay. And I was like, I'll just kind of get something going and figure it out from there. And I just realized this is not what I wanted to do. Found myself just not really liking the calls. I didn't like going and talking to cabinet makers. It just wasn't my thing. So I dove back into the classified ads, which is what you did in 1996, to look for a job. And I found a position with Prentice Hall Higher Education, which is what they called a publishing rep, which is really just a salesperson where you're walking around universities. And again, it's basically door-to-door sales, but you're selling to professors and helping them to choose the textbooks that they're going to use for the different classes that they teach. And that really got me into what I would say like a more successful sales career.
So it's kind of individual and door-to-door, but definitely much closer to a business sale there. I mean, the persona's got to be a little different there.
Totally. It was like equivalent of an enterprise sale. I mean, some of these sales that we were doing, if you're selling I remember one, we called them adoptions. They call them adoptions in higher education. They're really just sales. If you're selling to, say, like a general chemistry class at a state school, there's 800 students in that class every year. So you're selling a book that's $70 retail or $70 net. And again, this is 25 years ago. So I know textbook prices have gone up a bit, but that one sale would be like $50,000 or more. So some of these are actually pretty big enterprise sales, lots of committees. You would have 5, 6, 7 professors in the chemistry department that would be deciding on the book. They would take months to go through, review books, review supplements. How do they cover this material? Is this the right fit for us? And so you're just walking people through that enterprise sale, bringing in account managers and specialists and people from the home office to help you close those deals. And I did that for my very first year, is really where I realized like sales is something that I'm good at. I spent a lot of time just understanding the craft. I read a book every single week on sales or personal improvement, self-improvement. I did everything that my manager told me to do. And the very first year, my rookie year at Pearson Education, it's now Pearson, it used to be Prentice Hall, I was the number 5 salesperson out of over 300 reps across the country. And so at the sales meeting at the end of the year,
number one in your market 5, too, right?
Number 1 in my market, number 5 in the whole company. Yeah. And so end of the year, we're at the sales meeting and I'm up on stage getting this top performer award. And I basically look like, a kid still out of college. I was 23 at the time, right? I the collar doesn't fit and the tie is droopy and all that stuff. And people are like, what's the intern doing up on stage? And, but that was me because I was a top performer. I figured out like sales is just a process. And I just followed this process every day, every week, every month. And end of the year, I was at the top of the leaderboard.
Okay, so you go from selling no doors to selling all the textbooks.
Lots of textbooks. Either way, I'm killing trees.
So we've got the start of a theme there. Let's see if it continues. But this is where things get really interesting to me because you decided to leave sales and get into product management. Can you tell us what was the thinking there? What were you going through? Why make that choice?
Yeah, so the thinking is really kind of the career path that you have when you're in publishing. So you're in the publishing world. There's kind of almost everybody starts as a sales rep, and you start out in the field and you kind of cut your teeth learning the industry in the field. And then if you're promoted, you can either stay in the sales track and become a district manager and eventually a regional manager, or you can move into the home office and take a marketing or a product development position. And I always felt like sales was just like a necessary evil. Like, okay, I'll do the sales thing so I can go get a real career. I didn't go into sales either selling cabinet doors or textbooks thinking like, this is my career choice. It was just like, this is the job I can get. And this is going to help me pay the bills. And so I was thinking about it was an editor. That's what they call product managers in higher education, editors. And for 3.5 years, I did product management. It's actually producing the textbooks, working with the authors, figuring out what the new editions are going to look like, signing new authors, building new product, working on the technology side. Back then in 1998, we were building websites that were companions to the textbooks. And that was considered big innovation back then. Like, oh, you have a website that goes with the textbook. So I did that for about 3.5 years and really enjoyed the work. I mean, I liked doing product management. That felt like, okay, this is more of a career track. And in fact, I had applied for a director level position at Pearson before I ended up leaving Pearson and heading out to Silicon Valley.
I love how you talked about the products. I remember getting textbooks with a CD-ROM in the sleeve in the back. Yeah. All the innovation.
Those were me.
There you go. Thank you.
CDs were big deals. Yeah.
So in many regards, it feels like at this stage, you've made it. I mean, sales was a stepping stone. You stepped in, you get the role where you're defining and designing the products. Is that how you felt? Is that what you were?
Yeah, for sure. I was like, okay, this is real business in my mind. I'm like, this is what real business people do, or this is what people that have real jobs do. Not that I it didn't feel like sales was a real job. It just wasn't there were career sales reps at Prentice Hall. There were people, I remember a guy who was in my same region. He covered different accounts than me. And he sort of joked that he was the world's oldest book rep. This guy was like in his 50s, early 60s. He'd been doing it for 30 years. And everybody in that area knew him. There's a guy named Dave Morris. And that was his career. And he did great at it. He was a top performer consistently. And that was his job. And he loved it. I just didn't see that as a career path for me. I thought, well, I want to do something that's more innovative or development or something that requires more what I considered at the time, more intellectual capacity.
Okay. So I think this gives us a good idea of your state of mind as a product manager. And then we talked about leaving sales and getting back in. Your next role is getting right back into sales. So
that's right.
How did that come to be?
Well, I got excited with all the technology that we were building along with the textbooks. I mean, the textbooks were, kind of the core product. That's what authors wrote and that's what we published. But building the websites, doing the CDs, all of the other supplementary material, to me on a day-to-day basis, as I was developing those materials, there was like the whole innovation of online learning. This is back when distance learning was a new thing. Companies like Blackboard and WebCT, eCollege, like this whole concept of online learning was like, wow, like everything's going online. This is amazing. And that was way more interesting to me than just continuing to publish textbooks. And I got a call from a recruiter who said, hey, listen, I heard about some of the work you've done as a salesperson, and I've been tracking some of the work you do on the product side. We've got this startup out in Silicon Valley called Applia, and they're looking for somebody to help them run business development. Would you be interested? And so with my interest in technology, I traveled out to San Francisco a couple times on work trips. I had some friends out there from college that had moved out there. And every time I went to the West Coast, I was like, oh my God, like I got to figure out a way to get out to Silicon Valley. So I'd kind of had this little bit of a fever to move to Silicon Valley. And so when this opportunity came up that was in the tech world, still in publishing, higher education, the idea of like going back into sales was actually no big deal. It was just sort of like, okay, whatever. I just want to get out to Silicon Valley. And so I took that role and it was positioned as business development, not just straight up sales, even though that's really what it ended up being. I was viewing that position as more like partnerships and channel and that kind of stuff as opposed to like raw selling. But once we got into it and we realized what was it going to take to sell the product we were building, it was really just sales. And so doing that for a couple of years at Apple, we were able to grow from zero revenue, the first couple of million in revenue. And I realized like, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this thing. Like I've been able to do this twice now in two different companies, go from, nothing to selling stuff.
Nice. And it sounds like you've been kicking around the Bay Area ever since. Is that right?
Yeah. Kicking around, so to speak. Yeah. I mean, the goal was to move out to the Bay Area for 2 years and then move back to New York. And that never happened. So I tell people I moved to Silicon Valley for 2 years, 18 years ago. And, so here I am. This is life. This is where I am. So yeah, I've been kicking around since, working mostly with tech companies and startups since then.
Okay. So with all of that, you've had the opportunity to succeed at sales, consider leaving, considering coming back and working with some of the hottest companies. Mm-hmm. Looking at that, I'd love to hear just what surprised you most, especially in the tech sales area. What surprised you most about that time?
Great question. So on a macro level, the thing that surprised me most is how little there was an appreciation for sales in the tech world. So you saw a lot of this in the first wave of the dot-coms, where it was like, build a website, do a Super Bowl commercial, and everybody's going to buy your thing. Mm-hmm. And that whole first wave of dot-coms just imploded. Then even with the second or third wave of startups, even now, we still see it. It's less so now than even 10 years ago, but it was a lot of like, well, even though we're built an enterprise solution, enterprise software, some kind of hardware product, there still was this perspective from a founder of a company who's typically an engineer or product person, doesn't come from a sales background, that I'm going to build this product, the product's going to sell itself. And the thing that was most surprising to me was how little at the time, and this is again, maybe more 15 years ago than now, how little there was, how much little attention or credibility was given to the importance of sales as a successful leverage point in any company's growth. And that's why I ended up doing what I'm doing now, because about 10 years ago, I started doing workshops and I started teaching about sales to these tech companies. I realized that so many of them, they just didn't even know what sales meant. They just viewed sales as this like necessary evil, and they viewed it as this black box, and like, oh, I just have to like schmooze people and just like talk to people and send them a proposal and hope they buy from me. And my experience starting as a sales rep and then working at Applia and then 2 more startups, I realized like sales is no different than any other process in your company, whether it's product development, engineering, raising capital, running HR. There's a process for every part of your business, and sales is the same way. And so as I look back over the years and over the different experiences that I've had, I realized the reason I've been successful in sales is because I always was able to find and build a process to it. And that process is something that can be taught to and implemented by anybody out there. So
thinking about that, I think with our audience getting into sales, that's a fantastic perspective on tech sales. In the chance that any of your target audience is listening in on to this, now that you're coaching tech startups and working with leaders, what's the value prop? Who do you sell to? Who should be listening to this and go, hey, I should talk to Scott and go visit your website?
Well, most of the people that we work with are early stage B2B tech startups. Early stage, we define that as seed funded or Series A funded companies. And so those are companies that have already, they built a product, they've started selling it, they've got some revenue in the door, but the challenge that they have is getting past those early customers that maybe have come to them through introductions or through network, or maybe even early adopters that have found them on inbound somehow, the innovators and early adopters in any market. And so when they're trying to get past those first handful of customers and they're trying to ramp up to the first $1 million in revenue and then getting from $1 million to 10, that's where you really need to have some repeatability in your process. You need to have some systems in place in order to scale. And that's what we do, is we teach those companies how do you build out a repeatable prospecting plan of action? How do you do outbound the right way? How do you do your product demos? It's not just like clicking 17 buttons and then asking people, okay, what do you think? There's a process to how you run a product demo. There's a process to how you handle proposals. There's a process to hiring. There's a process to managing. And so we just teach those founders and those early stage management teams, like these are the processes that you have to understand and then implement in your company if you want to get repeatability and then scalability.
Love it. So I love the clarity of the stage, the entrepreneurs, the founders, and the value prop. If you're listening and you fit those profiles, reach out to Scott. His details are going to be in the description, and tune into his podcast because it's awesome. Scott, I know you said you couldn't stick around past the bottom of the hour. So I've got one more question and then some rapid fire and I can let you go. Does that work?
Absolutely.
Okay. This one is a little bit kind of off the main theme that we've had, but one of the things that I find so intriguing is the way leaders, particularly people in sales, portray themselves. And one of the things you share on Twitter is that you excel at Miss Pac-Man. And I'm super intrigued. Is this a hobby? Is this a profession? Is this your side hustle? What's the story there?
No, it's just one of those games. Like I do this when it comes to like movies or any games that I play. I just like playing. I don't really enjoy learning new games as much as I enjoy doing stuff that I've already learned. And so even like I go to an arcade, I used to go to arcades and stuff. And I'd always gravitate towards the Pac-Man machine instead of all the newfangled stuff with the headsets and things like that. I'm just like, oh, I'm going to play this. And I could crack 7 or 6 digits pretty easily, get to pretty high level. It's just, I don't know, something about the game that I like. I haven't played it in a while, but I am pretty good at it. I played it once. My son was watching me. He was amazed. He's like, oh my God, how do you do that?
So there you go. There's the street cred. My son's 8. I need to get better at one of these games just to make sure that he's impressed. My
son is 8 as well. There's a comic book store in our town that has some video games, and they had a Miss Pac-Man in there for a short time. And you could play it. So I played it and he watched me. He was just like, his mind was blown.
I swear I didn't expect to be getting really useful parenting tips from our conversation, but I'm going to take them because this is wicked.
No, don't take them from me because I do not take them. Like I'm struggling like everybody else. One thing I want to mention before we go, if you're listening and, whether you're in, product or tech, and even if you're not running a startup yourself, but you want to learn what is a core framework that you could be using in sales, like how do you think about sales as a process? I have a book that I wrote last year called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. And if you go over to my website at salesqualia, that's sales and then QUALIA.com, there's a button right there on the homepage where you can actually download a full copy of the PDF of version of the book. So that's one of the places we just tell people, look, if you just want to understand when I'm talking about sales as a process, sales as a framework, if you read that book, that will help you, I think, break a lot of the perceptions you might have of what it means to do sales, especially when you're talking about B2B enterprise level selling. I wrote the book for people to understand that there is a framework to this. So if you read that book, I think that will help you quite a ways, whether you're, again, an individual contributor or you're a startup CEO that's looking to build a sales process.
Thank you for mentioning it. I'm going to make sure that we have a link to the book on Amazon or somewhere else in the description of the podcast. So if you're listening in on YouTube or on your regular podcasting app, check the description too, because there should be a link there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just tell people I don't even care if I sell copies on Amazon because you don't make money on selling a book. I'd rather get the message out to as many people as possible, which is why we give away the PDF on the website.
Nice. I'll make sure that we're pointing people there too. Do you have time for a couple of really fast rapid fire questions before we wrap up?
I got 3 minutes before I got to go jump on a call.
Okay.
But
these will be super fast.
Man. Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite sales tool?
Like technology wise?
Technology wise or otherwise? What's your favorite?
LinkedIn.
Nice. Outside of work, movies. What's your favorite movie?
Elf.
Nice. Good choice. And when you were a kid, what did you want to grow up to be?
An architect.
Love it. Scott, this has been such a great conversation. A ton of great takeaway, but I appreciate you humoring the really fast rapid fire questions at the end. That's
like
great.
I just took a personality survey or something. Like, oh my God, I just learned about myself.
Well, it's great. You're going to hear in the others. We get all sorts of things like astronaut, healthy, Godfather, all of them. This is awesome. Cool, I have not heard your answers from anyone yet.
Cool.
Nice. This is great. I'm looking forward to our next conversation, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Dude, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Anytime.
Absolutely. We'll chat again soon and looking forward to that conversation.
All right, man.